Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger. Welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp LaRouche, the founder and chairman of the Schiller Institute. It's February 4th, 2021. Well, Helga, while a lot of or not a lot, but some of our viewers seem to be convinced that there's no problem with the pandemic or they're wishing it away, it does appear as though there have been some steps taken toward the proposals you've made for expanded international cooperation, particularly with the vaccine and with Russia and China involved. What's the latest you have on this?
Well, I'm actually quite pleased that there are signs of such international cooperation. Chancellor Merkel apparently was in contact with President Putin, and pending the agreement from the European Medicine Agency that the Sputnik 5 vaccine and the Chinese vaccine Sinopharm are actually safe, which everything speaks for that they are. They will be used in not only Hungary and Serbia, where they are already being used, but also in Germany and maybe more European Union countries. So this is very good because I had hoped from the very beginning and actually advocated that the best outcome of this pandemic would be that a new cooperation would start not only around vaccines, but also in the direction of building a modern health system everywhere. So I think this is definitely a good step. The British medical magazine, The Lancet, which has a very good reputation, they said that Sputnik 5, the Russian vaccine, is absolutely safe and effective. It has a 91.6% efficiency. So that is very good. Russia was the first country to have a vaccine ready, Sputnik 5. That's why they called it this way, that it created a certain Sputnik shock in a positive way. And they are now working with many other countries. For example, they are building a production site in Argentina, which is very useful, and also other developing countries. So I think this is, a very important development, and it's probably related to the fact that the EU has proven to be completely incapable. There was not only a sloppy delay in ordering vaccines, but also it's now clear that especially Ursula von der Leyen, who was very, very problematic already in her previous posts as ministers, especially defense minister. And she is now really a complete failure because she made all the decisions. She insisted that she had to make the decisions, and then she messed it all up. This is even mentioned of all people by Jean-Claude Juncker, the previous president of the EU. And he said it's not only the delay, which is wrong or was wrong, but also the fact that the EU imposed export controls on vaccines would have given a very bad signal to indicate that the EU is not caring about the suffering of the poorer countries. And actually, it was Serbia who first went to the EU wanting to order vaccines, but because of these export controls were denied that. So they went to Russia and China, and they are now much, much better supplied. So I think this is one more sign that this EU does not care for the interests of its member states. And, that's why the first steps, Merkel also talked with President Xi for cooperation in the medical field. So one can only hope that this is going to expand and lead to a more rational international cooperation in front of this pandemic. Now, this is all the more urgent because there is a new warning by Michael Osterholm, one of the leading medical experts in the United States, who made a warning saying that what is approaching the United States is a hurricane or a pandemic equivalent to a hurricane of the category 5, because what he sees emerging is an out of control spread of the new strains, the new variants coming from the British, South Africa, and Brazil, and that these new strains would all cumulatively spread in the United States and would bring about a situation as we have not seen it yet in this country. This is a quote of what he said. So that makes very, very clear that, you know, what we have been pushing from the very beginning is more urgent than ever. That we need urgently a change in thinking. The idea, you know, that it's just the rich countries which need the vaccines, and you know, up to now, I think more than 80% of all vaccines have been ordered by the so-called rich countries, and very little has gone to the developing countries. That is a short-sighted and extremely stupid thinking, because, you know, as the South African President Ramaphosa warned, that as long as you have the pandemic raging in one country, it will come back to all others. And the danger is that new strains develop, and, you know, they could come back, and, you know, the vaccines could then prove not to be effective, and it would create a complete disaster and havoc. So I think that this is an absolute urgent call, that, you know, there must be a rethinking on the side of the industrial countries, and that there must be a serious effort to build a modern health system in every single country on the planet. I think the standard for that is what the Chinese have proven to be capable of in Wuhan, where they, you know, they got it completely under control within 2 months. They built hospitals in 10 days for 1,000 people, several of them, and you know, that must be the beginning then of, you know, overcoming the underdevelopment of the developing countries, because you cannot build a modern health system without clean water, electricity, transport infrastructure, modern agriculture, and industrialization. And this is the warning shot, that we cannot allow any longer the underdevelopment of the developing countries, because it will bite us back. It will come back and make a solution impossible. So that's why I'm saying that the beginning of the cooperation between Merkel and Putin and Xi Jinping is a hopeful sign. And, you know, Joseph Borrell, the foreign representative of the EU, is in Moscow today for 3 days discussions with Lavrov, also on COVID cooperation. And, you know, he said recently that the way how the Asians were able to deal with the COVID crisis as compared to the Westerners proves that the Asian century has begun. And, you know, that is hopefully a sign that they are willing to learn some lessons, because Asia was able to cope with the situation much, much better. This was also the subject of a new study in Sydney of the Lowy Institute, which investigated, you know, what did the countries of Asia do better. Like, for example, New Zealand was the best one. They did not discuss China, but that was about the same level. They did absolute rigorous, quick lockdown, then testing, quarantine, contact tracing. Naturally, mask wearing is not a subject, and the use of digital technology for contact tracing. And in all of these categories, Europe is lacking behind, and the United States as well. So I think that the lessons from Asia have to be learned very, very clearly if we want to really get in a better situation.
And I think the other point to that, which you always emphasize when you talk about World Health System, is what you were just talking about, the need for a new Bretton Woods, a new financial system. And I think we'll come to that in a couple of moments. But it seems counterproductive at this point, where the Russians are opening their technology, the work they're doing to the rest of the world, that you have an escalation against Russia around this Navalny case. And there have been some new developments around that.
Well, I think if you ever want to have a fake story, here you have it, because this Navalny, first of all, he has much more popular support among Western journalists than inside Russia. Our friends in Russia are telling us that he has a very bad image, or he's not very known, and the only notoriety he has is because of the Western media. But now it turns out that the FSB, that's the Russian Secret Service, they put a video, or the Russian, I think, Foreign Ministry put this video, which was made by the FSB in 2012, of a discussion of one of the key campaign managers of Navalny, a guy called Ashurkov, in a discussion with a high-ranking British diplomat from the British embassy. And what they have filmed is a discussion where this Ashurkov is offering himself as an agent to the British by saying, if you pay us 10 or 20 million dollar per year, we can organize mass protests and riots in the streets of Russia. So this whole thing has, again, the character of regime change, the character of collusion with British intelligence. And what it now looks like is that the whole Navalny operation has the same character. Like, it's the guy also was an MI6 agent, so it has exactly the same marks like Russiagate, the Christopher Steele deployment in the coup against Trump. And this time they want to have a coup against Putin, because when this guy Ashurkov was, I think, interviewed by Reuters, the journalist asks at some point, "Yeah, and don't you think that there are people in the environment of Putin who could be incited to get rid of Putin?" So this is incredible. This is a typical classical British-run regime change operation with the aim to get rid of Putin, with the same tactics which were applied for 4 or actually 5 years against first the candidate Trump and then President Trump. And this is also applied now against China. So I think it's important that the world wakes up, that these things like the Navalny deployment, that they are not self-evident developments, but a lot of these things are run by intelligence operations, which, by the way, if people think this is a conspiracy theory, it is not. When you have history on it, you experience every day things happen, and you believe that it's what you see, like what's in the newspaper, what's in the TV reported. But then, from a standpoint of the historian, if you look at the prehistory of World War I or the prehistory of World War II, it becomes very clear that what is in the news, so-called, is only the tip of the iceberg, and that the much more important developments is what happens in terms of diplomacy, among the embassies, among the secret services. So all of these factors, in terms of historical developments, play a much, much bigger role than what is reported by CNN or some other very, very selective news reporting. And I think the Navalny case has all the earmarks of being an absolute British intelligence operation, not only British, but primarily British. And the aim is, among other things, get rid of Putin and stop the Nord Stream 2, for geopolitical manipulation. So one can only encourage those politicians in Germany and elsewhere who are still sticking to Nord Stream 2 to keep doing that, because it is, as I said, this is not what seems to be on the surface.
Well, it should be noted that when Ashurkov, the aide to Navalny, came under investigation, he fled to London, where he's been in exile since then. Now, you mentioned China. The Atlantic Council, which has a terrible history of promoting the worst of these British imperial policies, just released a document called the Longer Telegram Against China, reference the long telegram to 1946, George Kennan launching the containment policy against the Soviet Union. What can you tell us about this, Helga?
Well, this is, as the name says, referencing the Cold War document against Russia. It's supposed to be a declaration of war against Xi Jinping. And it is the most provocative document maybe so far, because it has the same character like what I just reported about this Reuters journalist, by basically saying, that that the problem is Xi Jinping and the dictatorship of the CPC, but that there are other leading Chinese officials, if they would get rid of Xi Jinping and his desire to set up an alternative system of world relations, if these officials would basically agree to submit to the unipolar world as it is pushed by such outfits like the Atlantic Council or the Henry Jackson Society in Great Britain, who are working very closely together, then China could have its place if it would give up the idea of pursuing its own economic model. Now, China has said many times, and again recently, I think it was Yang Yiqi, the number three in the Chinese hierarchy and head of the State Council, that China has no intention to export its model. It has no intention to proselytize Chinese philosophy. That it just offers cooperation to other countries to overcome their poverty, and many countries around the world regard that in their absolute self-interest. This is why President Fernandez from Argentina, for example, will go in the beginning of May to China to sign a memorandum of understanding of cooperation with the Belt and Road Initiative. And the Belt and Road Initiative plays a very important role in building trust and helping other countries with vaccines, before with other medical supplies. So, it is really an outrage, and I don't think it will affect Chinese policies at all. And Yang Yiqi also said that, the assumption that the Chinese people would be incitable against Xi Jinping is completely wrong, because he's absolutely loved by the Chinese population and they rally around the CPC. So I think that the geopolitical meanness of these circles is sticking out like a like a neon light in the night, and people will recognize it for what it is. But I don't think it will affect the Chinese policy in the slightest.
It's not just the meanness, but the fact that you have statesmen or spokesmen, I should say, for U.S. policy, essentially saying that we're headed toward a nuclear war with Russia and China.
Yeah, this is the head of the U.S. Strategic Command, Admiral Charles Richard, who just wrote an incredible article by saying in a completely nonchalant way that the coming war with Russia and China is likely. He just says it like that, as if he was not talking about the annihilation of the human species. Because if it comes to nuclear war, then that's probably it, because of the nuclear winter which would follow. So he's then, basically says, yeah, that's why the United States has to modernize its nuclear arsenal in order to prevent such a war. But that is like, saying that you put oil in the fire to squelch it. So it's really very, very dangerous. And I think that the Europeans should draw their lesson out of it, and not be part of this kind of escalation against Russia and China, because it is extremely dangerous.
Well, and that brings us to a discussion of the complete disarray of US policy under the new President Biden. You have the impeachment coming up, you have complete uh, rancor and bitterness, both inside each party and against each other in the Congress. This looks completely ungovernable, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Now, President Biden talked in his inauguration speech about that he wants to bring unity to the country, but then he should get his minions, like Pelosi and other such people in line and stop what they're doing. I mean, if you watch these people, it looks like they have completely gone off the deep end. Pelosi is screaming about the enemy within the Congress. She refers to this congresswoman from Georgia, Taylor Greene, who is, very strange, has very strange opinion, which look like QAnon. But she got 75% of the vote, so that's you can blame the American people that they voted for her, but you can't deny the fact that she is a congresswoman. Then you have the impeachment trial, which, according to all experts, is completely unconstitutional because the US Constitution talks about impeaching a president or some other sitting official. But Trump right now is a private citizen, and the the vindictiveness to use that trial to prevent him from ever running for any office again is just completely unconstitutional and just contributes to the extreme polarization. Also, another thing called the Republican Accountability Project, which is the effort to demonize any Republican or Republican congressman or senator who dared to support Trump or even mentioned the irregularities in the vote. They are now being, basically put on billboards, and I mean, it creates an atmosphere of a witch hunt. McCarthy, the McCarthy period is one thing. The Inquisition is probably a more likely image. That was an image which was used by President Obrador from Mexico when the Silicon Valley social media had put a ban on Trump and others. So I think it's an atmosphere of utmost polarization and insanity. And I think that's why what the LaRouche organization and the Schiller Institute are trying to do inside the United States by advancing this committee for the coincidence of opposites. This is a notion coming from Nikolaus of Kues, and the idea that above party lines and totally disregarding of the parties, there must be a collaboration to solve the really important projects, like solving the health crisis, responding to the hunger crisis of biblical dimensions, as David Beasley from the World Food Program was calling it, and that way bring in some sanity of addressing the real issues. And one can only hope that these tendencies will be stronger than those which go in the direction of civil war.
What I've been emphasizing on this matter of vindictiveness and shrieking across party lines and within the party is that it's designed to, along with censorship, silence the opposition to what's going on with the Great Reset. We saw the conference in Davos last week. There are a number of spin-off implications of that. What is happening now that that conference has been completed?
Well, it is exactly in the direction of preparing for, what could be the Minsky moment, that the effort to impose green policies could lead to a crash, of dimensions much, much worse than 2008. And, I think that the, the financial oligarchy is clearly gearing up for an eco dictatorship. One sign of it is, for example, that now the Italian President Mattarella has asked Mario Draghi, of all people, the former head of the European Central Bank, to try to form a government. I mean, he would apply, basically the kind of austerity policy, and when he made the famous statement that he would do whatever it takes to save the euro. He, in his position, if he would be able to form a government, apply the same medicine for Italy, and that does not forebode anything good. But as we discussed many times, this green reset, or the Great Reset, and the imposition of the Green Deal or New Green Deal is not possible without an eco-dictatorship. And while people may have thought that this is an exaggeration, well, now you have it. There is a new study in collaboration between UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme, which has a bad history for a very long time. Maurice Strong was once ahead of it, and Chatham House, the think tank, of the royal household, practically, and they basically say that the worst destroyer of the environment is meat consumption, and that people should stop eating meat, and that they should become basically vegetable eaters. And I mean, here you have it. You have an effort to, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. They want to decide, in what kind of a house or apartment you can live, how much the temperature is you can heat your house and apartment with, where you can travel or not travel, when you can fuel your e-car, electric vehicle, and all of these things. I mean, this is a nightmare. This is an absolute nightmare. And one can only say, the alternative is exactly, what my late husband has been proposing for many years: Glass-Steagall, end the casino economy, have a global Glass-Steagall, stop the, speculative excesses, which we have now seen again with this GameStop, so-called Robin Hood operation, which now turns out was completely manipulated by the hedge funds, and BlackRock was part of it, and they made $16 billion, while the little guys supposedly they lost a lot of money in the drop of the stocks. So all of these things, don't take things as face value. So we need a Glass-Steagall. We need a return to Hamiltonian banking. Every country must have a national bank. Then we have to have a new Bretton Woods credit system. And we need to have the fourth law. This is the crash program for international cooperation for fusion and space cooperation. And, if we do that, there is no reason why we cannot get out of this crisis in a very short time.
Well, Helga, we opened the discussion today with the positive news of the steps toward international cooperation around vaccines, and we can end it by talking about the positive news of the missions to Mars, which will be landing within the next couple of weeks. This is exactly what you were just talking about in the fourth law, and it's fairly widespread around the world, the potential that this represents.
Yeah, I think this is completely exciting that in this month, actually starting in 5 days from now, 3 nations will, have their Mars mission coming to fruition. The first one being the United Arab Emirates. They will land there or have their Hope orbiter in place, and this will study the the weather maps. It will start to develop a map of the weather patterns of Mars. So this will be on the 9th of February. Then 1 day later, the Chinese are landing their rover Tianwen-1, and that will investigate the existence of underground water on Mars. And that will be then followed on the 18th of February by the Perseverance orbiter rover of NASA, and that will investigate if there are traces of life on Mars. So with these 3 missions, one can expect incredibly exciting new scientific insights into this planet, and naturally start to explore in the medium term the idea of manned missions to Mars. However, that should have fusion power as a propulsion, because man cannot travel so long in space with normal chemical propulsion. But that is also good news that in the realm of fusion, there are major breakthroughs done by several places, both in the United States, around ITER, and also in China. So once we start to look at that international space cooperation, we are no longer Earthlings, but we are, a planetary species. And then our view about who is man in the universe will change completely. If you look at it from the standpoint of a greenie, they look at man as a parasite, where each man is, hurting nature, Mother Earth. But if you look at it from the standpoint of a spacefaring nation, then you see that the ability of the human mind to make discoveries about the laws of the universe is not something outside the universe, but the creative mind is the most developed part of the universe. And then you have a completely different perspective about the identity of human beings, and you can have a much more optimistic outlook. So I think that that is what you should join, and therefore I invite you again, cooperate with the Schiller Institute in all of these missions to create a world health system, but also to advance studies about the future of the human species in space.
And I think we can say to those of our viewers who are still somewhat stuck under the fog of despair following the election, these are pointing the direction toward actually a revival of the best principles of the American system, including foreign policy and international relations. So Helga, thank you for your report today, and we'll see you again next week.
Till next week.